Hi, my name is Marta Lomza. I work at the Museum of Oxford, where I support community groups to put on exhibitions about their heritage or any part of our city's history that they're interested in. I'm here to talk to you about how we try to produce these exhibitions in a way which we think is sustainable. So let me give you a little bit of context first. In 2019, we opened 3 temporary community exhibitions. The first one of these was called Windrush Year's Next Generations. It was co-produced with local organisations ACI, African and Caribbean Cultural Heritage Initiative, and BK which was a women's organisation started by refugee women from North Uganda in the early 1990s. This exhibition told the story of people who moved to Oxford from the West Indies and Caribbean, in their own words, as well as the words of their children and grandchildren. We also had Healing Spaces, which talked about child health in Oxford and was co-developed with the Oxfordshire Hospital School, Oxfordshire Health Archives and Oxford Hospitals Charity. And finally, in September 2019, we opened Queering Spires, a history of LGBTIQA+ spaces in Oxford. And this last exhibition is what I'm here to talk about today. Queering Spires was produced by a steering group made of LGBTIQA+ people with a strong connection to Oxford. These were community organisers and those who have lived in Oxford for a while and knew its queer history from their own personal experience. Our 2 main partners at the start were Tales of Our City, which is a grassroots local queer history project, which provided much of the initial research, and Oxford Pride, who lent us their collections and provided a solid connection to Oxford's queer communities. The exhibition remained open until March 2020 and was accompanied by several events. It was successful in attracting over 12,000 visitors, and its interactive, playful setup ensured that many of them contributed their own stories and points of view, which were then incorporated into the displays. It was not a static exhibition. It changed and became richer and more complex as time went on. Our steering group was made up of people with varying outlooks, and a lot of different opinions were expressed about aspects of the project. But one thing which was never really questioned, and we barely really discussed it, was that we were going to approach building the exhibition in as sustainable a way as possible. Our efforts were recognised when, earlier this year in 2020, we were the winners of the first ever Museums and Heritage Sustainable Project of the Year award. So, what does this mean in practice? First of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about why is it that we even wanted to do it this way? Why did we care about making our exhibition sustainable? Honestly, why wouldn't we? It's 2020. For a while now, scientific communities have broadly been in agreement about the fact that the world is in a state of climate emergency. The Oxford City Council itself declared climate emergency in early 2019. Oxford is no doubt one of the wealthiest cities in the UK, but it is also marked by some of the worst wealth disparities in the country, with people in many areas of the city experiencing multiple levels of deprivation and being disproportionately affected by the results of climate breakdown, such as air pollution or poor access to nutritious food. We are proud at the museum to put our communities at the heart of what we do. Our temporary exhibitions are not world-touring blockbusters, but they are showcases of local heritage put together by local people. We strive to create a space where we centre voices of those who have for a very long time been prevented from having their histories represented in mainstream historical narratives. So it would make no sense to be creating an exhibition which claims to do that and have these values by using practices which have been shown to have a detrimental effect on those same marginalised communities and on our city as a whole. What does it mean, though? What does sustainable mean? Well, I think it really does depend on your context. And we are quite lucky in Oxford in that we have a very strong presence of environmental activism and research. And this is something that I draw on in my practice. And when I say activism, I don't just mean people engaging in direct action to protest the situation that we're in, but also people who choose to buck the mainstream trends by running organisations and businesses which aim to have a positive social and environmental impact. I'm as much inspired by manifestos and programmes such as One Planet Oxfordshire as I am by seeing the daily practice of those businesses and organisations. This and the fact that we're talking about, again, community exhibitions and marginalised histories means that at the heart of our thinking about what sustainability meant in this context were the people of Oxford. It was important for us to make sure that whatever we did had or tried to have a positive impact on the city and its people. So what does sustainable mean? It depends on the context, but I think it's really important to always put people at the heart of it all. So how do we go about it? What did that mean in practice? Well, for us, it meant looking at what happens during an exhibition making process, which parts of this process have a negative social and environmental impact, and therefore which we should try and change. So in a very simplified version, the process involves deciding on the narrative, choosing the content, so things like objects, text, videos, audio, which supports that narrative, sourcing the items, so that might be buying, commissioning, or borrowing, bringing the items to the gallery, putting it all up, installing, and then taking it all down and disposing. So I won't be talking so much about the first two aspects of the process, the sort of deciding on the narrative and choosing the content. And that's not because they're not relevant here, but because they are entangled in a whole other web of challenges and issues, which it would take a while to unpack. And I think that's a whole other presentation for another time. So I'm just going to focus on the last four stages of what I've outlined here. So the first one is getting the items, sourcing your content. Where do you get your items from? So a lot of these would be loans. Some you might buy from existing places, some you might commission. And for us, there was a mixture of all these. What we wanted to make sure was that this was done with ethics and sustainability in mind. So here are some actual practical examples of how we went about it. We chose socially and environmentally responsible local suppliers for sourcing the main architecture of the exhibition. We bought recycled wood from Raw, which is a social enterprise dealing in reclaimed wood and which also provides training to people who face barriers in terms of accessing employment. Other supplies we have sourced from places like Orinoco, which is a scrap store and a charity which promotes reuse, art and creative play, and small local businesses. We bought some furniture pieces for making our queer cafe, which I'll show you in a second, from M+H, which is a UK-based charity and community working together to end homelessness. And homelessness is one of the most pressing social issues in Oxford right now. So this is a snapshot of our queer cafe where we had a lot of stuff on display. We had oral histories, we had videos, photos, reprints of original newspapers, queer magazines that we used to have in Oxford. So there were loads and loads of things crammed into it. And the furniture that you see and pretty much all the pieces that you see here were either from M+H or borrowed from people who are on the steering group. We also commissioned a whole new piece to envision the lost queer spaces, of which we didn't have any photos. And that was commissioned from an Oxford-born intersex activist and artist, Valentino Vecchietti. These collage pieces were made using recycled cardboard and magazines. And all that printing was done by a printer who was located within 5 miles of our building. And they're a company boasting very strong environmental credentials as well and engaging in a whole host of actions aiming to minimise their impact on the environment. Crucially to us, Raw, M+H, Orinoco and Mayfield are all located in areas of Oxford whose residents experience multiple levels of deprivation. Especially the first three are more than just businesses. They are initiatives important to local residents and contribute to creating a sense of community in their localities. They put people at the heart of what they do, and they do that while caring for the environment. So that's why we chose them. Moving on to getting things down to the gallery. Transport was crucial here. Air pollution is a problem in Oxford, and a lot of it is due to petrol and diesel vehicle traffic. Despite being hailed as a cycling city, traffic congestion is a major problem in Oxford. The last thing we wanted to do would have been to contribute to it even more. So in bringing items to our gallery, we were quite lucky in that we are located right in the heart of the city. We're close to many bus stops and we're on a road which is prohibited to private cars. So we capitalised on this and we used public transport, buses and bicycles to bring items into our galleries. The few times we had to use a taxi because of the weight or size of items, we used a local company called Go Green Taxis, which is an Oxfordshire company operating a low emissions fleet and which engages in other activities aiming to reduce their environmental impact. And then when it came to the end of the exhibition, quite an abrupt one in March 2020, I had to de-install everything very quickly. Temporary exhibitions can produce a lot of waste through creating bespoke display cases, labels and panels and other exhibition architecture which supports the displays. And often these are simply binned at the end of the exhibition. We were really serious about reducing, reusing and recycling. All the display items were reused from previous exhibitions, or as I showed earlier, sourced using sustainable suppliers. And this reduced the amount of waste produced significantly. Most items will be resold and reused in future displays. Any new items which we bought were made of reusable materials, such as bamboo, glass, fabric, cardboard, and bought with the thought of using them again for future museum activities. So when I took down the exhibition in much haste in the week before the first lockdown, I binned less than 1 kilogram of waste. In fact, I think it was probably less than half a kilo. This was mostly made up of some adhesive Velcro strips, which we used to mount items, and some printed items which couldn't be reused. So these were some adhesive vinyl panels attached to walls and floors. There was also some recyclable waste, such as post-it notes, cardboard boxes, paper printouts, and so on. And this was probably somewhere between 2 and 3 kilograms of waste. This is all recyclable. And we're lucky to have very good recycling infrastructure in Oxfordshire. So that's kind of how we went about it and why we did it and what we did in a nutshell. And just a few parting remarks on that. What is the impact of it all? Did we stop climate change? I don't think I need to answer that. Did we do everything perfectly? Of course not. We did buy a few things in online shops with less than impressive ethical credentials. Some of the more bulky items were brought to the gallery in petrol vans. Not all the printed materials will be reusable in the future. So we definitely have more to do, and there's plenty that we'd like to try with the next exhibitions. But by being mindful of our practices, we did significantly minimise our waste and carbon footprint at every stage of putting the exhibition together. We minimised vehicle emissions and air pollution, and we reduced the overall carbon footprint of the whole process. And crucially for us, there was a positive social impact of the whole process. The exhibition was funded through the National Lotteries Community Fund grant, and so much of the money went into local businesses, benefiting local people, supporting local initiatives which are trying to make a difference. For an exhibition about a local historically marginalised community, this was essential, and we're proud of the way that we achieved it. So over to you. I think what sustainability means will be different for every project and every location. I really think it's context driven and depends on the size of your institution, depends on where you are, depends on what's important to your project and to your community. I think the crucial thing here is to take the time right at the start to think about what the essence of your project is and how the process of creating it can keep a hold of that essence or maybe even strengthen it using practices which are socially and environmentally sustainable. You will not be able to do everything, but you can do something. One sustainable project does not stop the climate emergency, but it can not contribute to it, and it can have a positive impact on the world immediately around you. So I think it's worth trying. So that's it really. Thank you so much for listening. And if you've got any questions, I'm really happy for you to email me. My email is just here at the bottom of the presentation, or otherwise you can find me on Twitter. You can always ping us a message on social media and so on. Thanks very much.